She was just logistics, until she picked up a rifle and shattered every expectation. In the deadly winds of Red Mesa Valley, one woman's silent skill turned mockery into fear, training a team to see the battlefield in ways no manual could teach. They never thought I was serious when I picked up the rifle. "Careful, Lena. That thing kicks harder than anything you've ever held." One of them chuckled, his voice carrying the easy arrogance of someone who had never been told no in his life. The others laughed right along with him. To them, I was just logistics. No rank worth noting. No stripes, no patch history. Just a clipboard, a checklist, and a face they could dismiss in seconds. My uniform carried no story, not on the surface. They saw a pin clipped to my pocket and a ponytail they mistook for compliance. They didn't see the years beneath, the fragments buried under redacted lines and forgotten files. We were at Red Mesa Valley, a jagged desert cut into the high plateaus outside Santa Fe. The Army liked to use it for advanced evaluations, a place where even the best shooters found themselves humbled. The cliffs warped the wind like a trickster, gusts dancing back and forth in sudden reversals, echoes bouncing so strangely that even seasoned spotters got their calculations wrong. On that particular day, the range swelled with wagers and bravado. Every man out there fancied himself a sharpshooter. An older spotter, his skin burned deep by years of sun, shoved the weapon into my hands like he was offering the setup to a joke. A monstrous Barrett, polished to gleaming. He grinned as though he expected me to flinch just from its weight. "Something for the scrapbook," he said. "Hold it tight. It kicks a little worse than your hairdryer." The laughter that followed was as rehearsed as it was cruel. I said nothing. Instead, I laid down on the mat and balanced the rifle with movements that weren't guesses. Their chuckles grew louder. To them, I was play-acting. First-timer at the firing line. A tourist. One leaned close, smirking over my shoulder. "You even know what you're looking at?" I tilted my head slightly. "I've seen what I need to." He thought I was brushing him off. What I was actually doing was listening, mapping the way the wind twisted through the valley, how it rose and dipped, how it paused for the briefest of instants like the desert itself was holding its breath. Without a word, I shifted 10 feet left. The laughter thinned. "Why'd she move?" one muttered. The older spotter stopped smiling. His eyes narrowed. "That's the windbreak line. She's reading slope." I didn't confirm. Didn't need to. I adjusted the bipod, fine-tuned the scope without once looking through it. My hands remembered patterns I hadn't called on in years. Someone slid a round into the chamber, still smirking. "Let's see if you even know where the trigger is." I settled into prone. The valley whispered. The wind held its breath. 2 seconds of silence no one else heard. I squeezed. The rifle roared. Recoil slammed against me, but my body absorbed it like it had 1,000 times before. The round vanished into haze. A heartbeat later, steel rang across the valley. Perfect center. Silence fell like a curtain. The laughter was gone. The spotter fumbled with his tablet, refreshing readings over and over. No drift. No error. Just a clean center strike at a range that chewed up pride and spat it back in pieces. "That's impossible," he whispered, almost to himself. I stood, lifted the heavy rifle with one arm, and handed it back like it was nothing more than borrowed equipment. "Thanks," I said simply. Their eyes clung to me like I was something they couldn't name. When I walked off the line, none of them reached for the weapon I left behind. The steel plate downrange gleamed under the New Mexico sun, scarred by a single mark. Mine. Behind me, a younger sniper's voice cracked the silence. "That wasn't luck. She meant that shot." Another voice followed, quieter, uneasy. She used the echoes. Nobody teaches that." I didn't turn back. My boots crunched against gravel with a steady rhythm. To them, I was still logistics, a paper pusher in a uniform with no story. But they were wrong. They'd always been wrong. By the time I reached the lockers, I could hear them trying to dig. Fingers tapping into the personnel network. Looking for a file. My name, Elena Marquez. Logistics, Tier 3. Observer. Non-combat assignment. That was all they'd see at first. Pages of black bars, top secret tags, redacted history. But if they pushed harder, if they knew which locked doors to pry open, they'd stumble onto fragments. Snippets from operations that never officially happened. Notes scratched beside nameless coordinates. And one word that slipped through more than once, Mirage. Not a unit, not really. More like a shadow line. A thread pulled through missions where precision mattered more than numbers. I carried that thread once, until it frayed me thin, until they buried me in logistics. I dropped my clipboard onto the bench and unlocked my own gear case. The hinges were scarred, leather cracked from years of travel. Inside lay the only part of me the paperwork couldn't erase. My rifle, custom built, stock worn smooth by years of use. Scope fine-tuned to my eye alone. I laid it on the bench. The room went silent. The lead instructor approached slowly, boots crunching in careful steps. His face wasn't mocking anymore. It carried something else. Hesitation, maybe respect, maybe fear. "Ma'am," he began, "we owe you an apology." I raised a hand before he could continue. "No apology needed. You couldn't have known." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. He nodded once, stepped back. I returned to the firing line. This time no one laughed. I set my rifle down, adjusted my stance, breathed. The canyon winds shifted again, erratic, dancing across the valley. Enough to throw off anyone relying on calculators. Enough to humble even the best. But I didn't need numbers. I didn't need a spotter. "This valley lies," I murmured. But lies have patterns. 3 targets. 3 distances. The timer marked 18 seconds from my first shot to my last. 3 hits. 3 clean strikes. When I stood, silence lingered longer than the echo of the rifle. And in that silence, respect finally replaced laughter. By the next morning, the whispers had spread like desert fire. I didn't have to hear the words to know. It was in the way soldiers glanced at me, then looked away too quickly. In the way voices dipped to a hush when I entered a room. Respect mixed with unease. "Who the hell is she, really?" someone muttered in the chow line. They weren't supposed to get answers. Not the full ones. Even I avoided them. Because the truth wasn't neat. It wasn't something you could type into a file and stamp with "cleared for duty." But silence never lasts forever. Memories have a way of cutting through. That night, lying in my bunk in the logistics wing, I found myself back in Afghanistan, Kandahar province. For years earlier, the mission that should have ended me, or erased me, depending on how you looked at it. We were 6 in total, tasked with dismantling a mobile command hub tucked into the hills, guarded by fighters with gear they shouldn't have had. Drones couldn't see through the canopy. Satellites gave us nothing. Command sent us because Mirage didn't need maps. We carried silence better than equipment. I set up on a ridge half a click out. My rifle steady, scope glinting faint in starlight. The wind that night was a knife, twisting, carving eddies through the valley below. I tuned into it the way I always did, listening, not calculating. At 0200, the others moved. By 0215, they were compromised. First burst of gunfire split the night. Shouts in Pashto. Tracers cutting across the dark. My comms filled with panic. Calls for extraction. Requests for fire support. Command radioed back. Negative. Too hot. No support available. I was their only overwatch. So I spoke in the only language I had left. My first shot dropped a machine gunner mid-burst. Second clipped the radio operator before he could call reinforcements. Third cracked through a lantern, throwing half the hillside into darkness. The others used that window, dragging a wounded man between them. Every stumble, every breath, I bought with another round. By 0247, I was out of ammo. But not one of ours had died. Sergeant Lewis nearly did. A round through his side. When the bird finally braved the ridge to pull us out, the crew chief shouted there was no room for dead weight. Not to me. I carried Lewis onto the bird myself, boots slick with his blood. He lived, barely. Command buried the mission. Too many questions about what gear the enemy carried, where it came from. They marked it a success, but made it clear I was done. "You've given enough," they said. "You're more valuable off the field." Translation, "You've seen too much. Best to hide you in paperwork." That was the day Elena Marquez, the sniper, stopped existing. They handed me a clipboard and told me to keep my head down. But some parts of you don't stay buried. Not forever. Back in Red Mesa Valley, I opened my eyes to the hum of the generator outside my quarters. The silence had been broken once. And now the whispers were spreading again. And a part of me, God help me, wasn't sure I wanted to stop them. Red Mesa Valley didn't sound the same anymore. The loud boasts, the wagers slammed onto tables, the cocky smirks, all of it had dulled. Not gone completely, but muted, like everyone had suddenly realized someone else might be listening. Me. I walked to the line with my clipboard just like before. But heads turned now. Recruits straightened their stances as I passed. Instructors lowered their voices. No one quite met my eyes. It wasn't admiration. Not exactly. Respect and unease make strange companions. The first clue came when Sergeant Clay, the lead trainer, barked out during drills. Winds shifting right at 3 clicks. Before the recruits could adjust, one of them hesitated. "Ma'am," he asked, "do you agree?" Every head swiveled toward me. I could have stayed quiet. Pretended I hadn't heard. But I was tired of pretending. 2 clicks, I said flatly. The canyon walls funneling it back. The recruit adjusted. Fired. The target rang. Clay's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Not out loud. From then on, they watched me more than him. I hadn't asked for it. Didn't want it. But it happened anyway. By the 3rd day, a ritual had formed. They'd fire, miss, then glance my way like children waiting for correction. I rarely spoke, only when it mattered. But the silence after my words carried more weight than Clay's entire lectures. The range wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine, and they knew it. That night, I overheard 2 lieutenants near the mess tent. They reopened her clearance. No way. I saw the order myself. Top access reinstated. Somebody up high wants her back on the grid. Back on the grid. It had been years since anyone used that phrase about me. The next morning, a new recruit joined the program. Fresh-faced, trying to mask his nerves with forced bravado. He asked the question I'd been waiting for. "So," he said loudly, "who's the top shot here?" No one answered. Not the instructors. Not the seasoned shooters. Instead, one by one, they turned their eyes toward me. I didn't lift my head. Didn't acknowledge him. I was already sighting through the scope, already listening to the canyon's breath. Even the drone circling above caught it. Its camera zoomed in, not on the target, not on the new recruit, but on my trigger finger. Because even the system knew. That range no longer belonged to men with big voices and bigger egos. It belonged to me. It started with a stack of papers dropped on my desk, stamped with clearance codes I hadn't seen in years. Independent instructor. Precision marksmanship. I hadn't applied. Didn't sign anything. Someone higher had pushed it through. By the next morning, 12 recruits stood in a half circle around me on the range. Wide-eyed, hands twitching with nervous energy. There had been more than 200 names on the wait list, but they cut it down to 12. And I cut it further, not by skill, but by stillness. By who could listen more than they spoke. Marksmanship isn't about muscle memory. It isn't about who can spit out numbers fastest. It's about listening. So I started them where no one expected. "Sit," I told them. No rifles. No scopes. Just the desert, the heat, the wind. They shifted uncomfortably. Breath control. Meditation. "Silence," I said. "Before you touch a rifle, you need to hear the ground breathe." They fidgeted. Some rolled their eyes. Others exchanged nervous glances as if hoping someone would call my bluff. But by the 3rd session, their shoulders dropped. Their eyes softened. They started noticing. The way dust curled in spirals. The way canyon rocks bent echoes. The way silence had rhythms. One of them finally asked, "Ma'am, is this really part of shooting?" "Yes," I answered simply. "Great shots are made long before the trigger is pulled." Command didn't understand. They sent observers. Men in clean uniforms and dark sunglasses, clipboards in hand, standing just far enough back to look official. They said nothing, just watched. When one finally approached me during a break, he asked, "How exactly are you training them?" "I'm not teaching them to shoot," I said. "I'm teaching them to listen." He didn't write that down. Probably didn't know how. By the 2nd week, their progress was undeniable. I let them pick up rifles again, but only after they proved they could feel a wind shift before it came. They missed, of course. Most of them did. But their misses were different now. Calculated, cleaner, closer. No one was spraying and hoping. They were testing instinct against truth. And when one finally hit a target he never would have dreamed possible weeks before, he didn't cheer. He just exhaled steady, like he'd expected it. That was the first sign the training was working. And that's when the rumors started spreading faster than the wind itself. You can train in silence for weeks, months even. But silence doesn't last forever. One day, the noise comes. It came without warning. We were mid-session when the sirens ripped through Red Mesa Valley. Sharp. Urgent. Not a drill. Every head snapped toward the ridge line where black smoke coiled skyward. A convoy had rolled straight into an ambush 2 miles east. Not simulation. Not training. Real. The quick response unit was already stretched thin across the sector, which left us. All units, stand by. The range commander's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. Possible deployment. Marquez, bring your team in. My team. That's what he called them. The 12 recruits I'd only just started molding. They weren't ready. But combat never asks if you're ready. I looked at their faces, fear, adrenaline, confusion. Some gripping their rifles too tight, knuckles bone white. Listen to me, I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the chaos. What you've learned, it wasn't theory. This is what it was for. You don't chase the fight. You don't panic. You breathe. You listen. We moved fast, cutting across the desert in 2 transports. I rode up front, eyes locked on the horizon as the smoke thickened. When we crested the ridge, the scene below snapped into brutal focus. 2 trucks disabled, pinned in crossfire from camouflage positions. Returning fire, but blind. Their rounds sparked uselessly against stone. The recruits froze. Real death hits harder than paper targets. Positions, I ordered. Something in my tone snapped them back. They scattered across the ridge, dropping into prone. Scopes shaking at first. Don't look at the targets. Look at the dust. The wind. The echoes, I said. I dropped beside them, set my rifle. My scope caught the shimmer of heat above a muzzle flash. I didn't fire. I wanted to see who would. One of them exhaled slow. His finger curled. Crack. Echo. Silence. Down below, one of the ambushers slumped. It wasn't perfect. Not clean. But it was real. Others followed. Shots staggered, uneven, but purposeful. Each round wasn't panic. It was listening, adjusting, trusting. Within 3 minutes, the ambushers broke, scrambling out of their positions. The convoy below held. The recruits turned to me then, eyes searching. Some for approval, some for explanation. I gave them neither. Only 4 words. This is just beginning. The ridge still smelled of burnt powder when we rolled back to base. The recruits rode in silence. Not triumphant, not joking, just quiet. And in that quiet, I saw it. The first shadow of the truth every marksman eventually learns. Every shot leaves weight behind, even the right ones. Especially the right ones. Command was waiting at the gate when we returned. Brass polished, uniforms crisp, smiles too wide. Outstanding work, the range commander said. Quick response saved that convoy. You should be proud. I didn't smile back. They weren't ready. They performed under fire, he countered. That's the best proof of training anyone could ask for. Proof. That was the word he chose. Not survival. Not lives saved. Proof. That night, reports went out. I didn't need to see them to know the language. Marquez's team neutralized ambush. Demonstrated unconventional marksmanship methods. Phrases designed for chain-of-command ears, carefully sharpened to climb ladders. By morning, I had visitors. Not uniforms this time. Suits. Pentagon. We've been following your progress, one said smoothly, sliding into the chair across from me in the debrief room. Impressive. Very impressive. The other leaned forward, tone softer. Persuasive. You've built something unique here, Miss Marquez. Something scalable. We'd like to formalize it. Deploy it. I stared at them, expression flat. You want to weaponize instinct. We want to replicate results, he corrected without missing a beat. With the right framework, this could change. No. The word left my mouth before he finished. Both blinked. Not used to being cut off. I'm not here to mass-produce ghosts, I said. I'm here to make sure the next generation survives. One of them tightened his jaw. The other just nodded, like he'd expected resistance. This isn't a request, Miss Marquez. Sooner or later, someone higher will make the decision for you. Better to cooperate now. They left with polite smiles, but the air felt heavier after they were gone. Later, in the quiet of my quarters, I opened my old leather case. Not the rifle. The journal tucked beside it. Logan Reyes's logbook. My old instructor. Pages filled with wind patterns, breath rhythms, sound maps. He'd given it to me with a single promise. You'll know when to pass it on. For years, I couldn't. The weight was too heavy. But after what I'd seen on that ridge, the way my recruits shifted from students to survivors in seconds, I knew the time was coming. And I knew something else. Command wasn't going to let me stay in the shadows anymore. My silence had been protection once. Now it was bait. The push came fast. Briefings, protocol binders, suggestions that weren't really suggestions. Every day another sheet slid across my desk, Document your methods. Standardize your drills. Reassign recruits under central command. This program belongs to the Army, not to you, one colonel said flatly. I nodded, smiled even, then walked back out to the range and ignored every word. Because the truth was simple. If I handed them my methods, they'd gut them. Reduce instinct to checklists. Mass-produce what was never meant to be manufactured. And the soul of it, the silence, would be lost. So I kept training my 12, but differently. Quietly. At night, after the official sessions ended, I gathered them again. Out beyond the floodlights, where the desert swallowed sound. Forget the manuals, I told them. Forget the charts. The world doesn't wait for you to pull out a wind table. You listen. You feel. You trust what's around you. I showed them how to hear pressure shifts in the scrape of dust. How to judge distance by the shimmer of heat above stone. How to use the pause between echoes as a clock for their breath. They learned faster than I expected. Maybe because they knew this wasn't just training anymore. It was survival. One night, the youngest, Santos, finally asked what none of them had dared. Ma'am, why aren't you in charge of all this? Why hide out here? His honesty left no room for lies. Because command doesn't want a person, I said quietly. They want a weapon, and weapons don't get to choose who pulls the trigger. Silence followed. Heavy, but not empty. They understood. The pushback came sooner than I'd hoped. 2 colonels arrived with MPs at their shoulders. Their message was clear. Effective immediately, the recruits were reassigned. My role reduced to advisor. I signed the papers, saluted when ordered, stepped aside just like they thought I would. But later that night, I met my 12 again at the far edge of the valley. Stars sharp above us, wind cutting low. They'll take you soon, I told them. Try to use you, bend you into their molds. Their eyes burned in the dark, locked on me. Don't let them. What I've taught you, keep it quiet. Keep it yours. Because silence, real silence, can't be stolen. And in that moment, I knew something certain. Whether I stayed or left didn't matter anymore. The legend of Mirage wasn't mine to carry. It was already theirs. The colonels thought they'd won. They stripped my title, reassigned my recruits, stamped everything with the seal of bureaucracy. To them, it was over. Another program absorbed into the system. Another soldier folded back into silence. But legends don't vanish because someone writes inactive on a form. They spread. Within 48 hours, word of Red Mesa Valley had crossed 3 bases. Whispers in mess halls. Rumors in barracks. Some wild, some close to the truth. But every version ended the same way, with a name they thought they'd buried. Mirage. My 12 carried it forward without me. Even under new instructors' barking orders, even as the system tried to mold them back into regulation soldiers, I saw it. The stillness. The instinct. The refusal to be shaped into someone else's weapon. They didn't need me beside them anymore. And that was enough. I packed my case one final time. Rifle. Journal. Nothing else. When I passed the firing line, the new recruits looked up. None dared speak. But they watched. And then something happened I'll never forget. One by one, every shooter lowered their rifle. Not in protest. Not in surrender. But to breathe. To listen. For just a moment, the valley went still. They weren't imitating the colonels. They weren't following manuals. They were following me. I walked past without breaking stride. No farewell speeches. No goodbyes. At the edge of the valley, the desert wind curled around me, tugging at my sleeves, carrying echoes across the stone. I paused, closed my eyes, listened the way Logan Reyes once taught me. The wind whispered the same truth it always had. Silence is its own kind of voice. I smiled. Faint. Unseen. Then I kept walking. Because Red Mesa Valley wasn't theirs anymore. It never had been. I left Red Mesa before dawn. No ceremony. No escort. Just me, my case, and the silence. The desert stretched endless, painted in soft blues before sunrise. My boots pressed into sand that erased the tracks almost as fast as I made them. A fitting end. Mirage was always meant to vanish. Behind me, the base carried on. Reveille would sound soon. Recruits would line up. Instructors would bark. Another day in uniform. But something had shifted, and it wasn't going back. By the time the brass realized it, it would be too late. Because you can strip a title. You can shred paperwork. But you can't unteach instinct. Those 12 had already passed it on without knowing. A glance here. A correction there. A whispered reminder to breathe. By the time command stamped its seal on their new orders, Mirage was already spreading, like wind through canyons, carrying lessons no manual could contain. Whispers traveled faster than orders. They always did. And in the months that followed, I heard them. Not directly, never directly, but in fragments passed by mess hall gossip, in the way strangers glanced twice at me when I passed through transport hubs. They say she never misses. They say she can read the wind like it talks to her. They say Mirage isn't one person, it's anyone who listens. That was enough. I didn't need my name back. Didn't need recognition. Legends live longer without faces. At a diner outside Albuquerque, I unfolded Logan Reyes's journal one last time. The pages were worn thin, corners soft with age. His notes covered in fading ink. Patterns, rhythms, echoes. All the things he had taught me. I copied the last page into a fresh notebook, my handwriting steadier than I expected. Then I left the journal under the booth cushion when I paid my bill. Someone would find it. Someday. Maybe a young soldier too stubborn to quit. Maybe a kid chasing ghosts in the desert. Whoever it was, they'd read his words, and through them, mine. Because silence travels. I walked out into the morning heat, case in hand, and didn't look back. Red Mesa Valley lay miles behind me now. But I knew the truth. It was never about me. It was about the echo. And echoes don't die.